1:15 local time on February 28, 2026. The duty officer at the IRGC Aerospace Force command post outside Tehran was watching a quiet scope. He had no reason not to be. Nuclear talks were still technically active. The last round had broken down 6 days ago, but that was diplomacy. It broke down and resumed. It had broken down before. The Strait of Hormuz was calm. The air picture over western Iran showed nothing unusual. 43 surface-to-air missile batteries across Iran's integrated air defense network were online and tracking. The Bavar 373, Iran's domestically built long-range SAM. Think of it as Iran's answer to the S-400, years in development, built specifically because Western sanctions meant they couldn't buy the real one, was holding its coverage sectors over Tehran and the nuclear facilities to the southwest. The duty officer's scope was clean because the first weapons were already inside Iranian airspace, not inbound. Inside, already past the outer detection layer. The B-2 Spirit stealth bombers that had launched from Diego Garcia 11 hours earlier had been flying at altitude, radar cross-sections smaller than a large bird, navigating on inertial systems that needed no emissions to update their position. The Bavar 373 search radar was scanning for contacts. The B-2s gave it nothing to scan. Think of it as trying to find someone in a dark room who isn't breathing loud enough to hear. 3 separate gatherings of Iranian regime officials were struck within the first 30 seconds of the operation. That sequencing was deliberate. The targeting intelligence behind Operation Epic Fury's opening salvo had been built over months. Not satellite imagery alone, but a layered picture assembled from signals intelligence, human sources, and pattern-of-life analysis precise enough to know when the most senior leadership would be physically co-located and unable to disperse in time. The same problem Ukraine's Special Operations Forces had solved against the Black Sea Fleet in 2023. The weapon is the easy part. Finding the moment is the operation. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed in the first wave. Iran's integrated air defense had been built to stop exactly what happened next. The Bavar 373 batteries defending Tehran were online. The Tor M1 point defense systems protecting the IRGC command nodes were active. Radar emissions were up, tracking sectors assigned, crews at battle stations. The air defense architecture was real, it was layered, and it had been built over 30 years specifically for this scenario. It didn't matter, because the first thing the strike package hit wasn't the targets. It was the radar network that would have seen the strike package coming. EA-18G Growlers operating from carrier strike groups in the Persian Gulf had been building an electronic picture of Iran's radar emissions for 72 hours before the first weapon released. The Growler's AN/ALQ-99 jamming system, a platform that turns an F-18 into a flying radar blinder, had mapped every emitter frequency, every scan cycle, every gap in coverage. Think of Iran's air defense radar network as a grid of security cameras. The Growlers spent 3 days learning exactly when each camera blinked. The first wave of strikes hit during the blink. By the time the Bavar 373 operators realized they were no longer seeing a clean sky, the weapons that had already passed their coverage arc were in terminal phase. 50 cruise missiles, 40 strike aircraft, 900 targets designated in the first 12 hours. The IRGC's underground missile cities were the strategic core of Iran's deterrent. 30 hardened facilities buried 400 to 1,500 feet into granite bedrock in the Zagros and Alborz mountain ranges, connected by over 100 tunnel systems, designed over decades specifically to survive exactly the kind of air campaign now underway. Transporter erector launchers could emerge from tunnel exits, reach pre-surveyed firing positions, release ballistic missiles at targets across the region, and return underground before a retaliatory strike could arrive. The entire system was built around one assumption, that no surface strike, regardless of precision, could reach deep enough to stop it. That assumption was correct for every weapon in the U.S. arsenal except one. The GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, 30,000 pounds, 20 feet of hardened steel and explosive designed to punch through 60 feet of reinforced concrete before detonating. Only the B-2 can carry it, 2 per aircraft. The B-2s that had crossed Iranian airspace undetected weren't carrying standard precision weapons. They were carrying the one thing in the American inventory built specifically for targets that weren't supposed to be reachable. When the first GBU-57 impacted the reinforced entrance of Facility 7 in the Zagros range, the overpressure through the tunnel system was enough to collapse 3 interconnected chambers. The second bomb arrived 11 seconds later, 2 meters from the first impact point, driving into the cavity the first weapon had opened. That's not a strike. That's surgery performed with a sledgehammer, and it works. Iran's retaliation was immediate, and it was real. The IRGC's surviving launch infrastructure began firing within 40 minutes of the first American bomb. Khaybar-Shikan ballistic missiles, Iran's most capable medium-range system, a road mobile weapon with a maneuvering re-entry vehicle that can bleed off radar tracking during terminal phase, arced out of launch boxes in western Iran toward U.S. installations across the Gulf. Al Udeid in Qatar, Al Dhafra in the UAE, Naval Support Activity Bahrain. The IRGC wasn't firing at Israel first. It was firing at the bases American aircraft were launching from. Cut the airfields and the strike packages stop. The Patriot batteries around those installations were the last line, not a comfortable position to be in. The PAC-3 interceptors that had protected Camp Bering in Kuwait weeks earlier were working the same math now across 5 simultaneous engagements at 3 separate bases. Maneuvering re-entry vehicles are harder than ballistic arcs. The seeker has to reacquire through the terminal evasion. Not every intercept worked. Al Dhafra took 2 impacts in the first wave. Fires burned on the eastern ramp for 6 hours, but the IRGC's launch infrastructure was burning faster. Each Khaybar-Shikan fired from a road mobile launcher left a thermal and signal signature that MQ-9s orbiting at altitude captured within seconds of launch. The firing coordinates fed into a targeting queue. F-15Es on combat air patrol with GBU-39 small-diameter bombs, each aircraft carrying 8 of them, each weapon a $40,000 GPS, guided glide bomb with 60 nautical miles of unpowered range, were already assigned to the launch area before the missile completed its boost phase. The launcher that fired was erasing itself from the target list simultaneously with its own launch. Iran had built its deterrent on the assumption that enough launchers, dispersed across enough geography, could survive any first strike and saturate any defense. The assumption required the launchers to survive. The MQ-9s overhead meant survival required not firing. Not firing meant the deterrent didn't deter. That's the geometry Iran had spent 30 years trying to solve and hadn't. By 9:45 local time, 8 hours and 30 minutes into Operation Epic Fury, CENTCOM had struck over 900 targets. Iran's air defense network over western Iran had collapsed. The Bavar 373 batteries that had been online at 1:15 were either destroyed or had gone silent, choosing to survive by staying dark. A radar that stays dark to avoid being killed is a radar that isn't protecting anything. The duty officer who had been watching a clean scope at 1:15 was no longer at his post. The command node he'd been working from had been on the strike list since the 4th week of intelligence preparation. The weapons had simply arrived in the right sequence to make sure he had no warning before they did. That's not luck. That's planning measured in months, executed in minutes. The Strait of Hormuz closed 4 days later. 50% of Iran's missile launchers remained intact after the first week. The underground facilities that survived were already reconstituting production. The war that was supposed to end Iran's missile threat had, by every classified assessment available, set it back by months, not years. 2 things can both be true. The opening strike of Operation Epic Fury was the most precisely executed air campaign in the history of American military power, and the target it was built to destroy was still partially functional when the smoke cleared. The B-2s had done everything they were designed to do. The problem was what they were aimed at had been designed to survive exactly that.